The coughing that came from beneath me every night, even though the basement was empty. The truth behind it will send chills down your spine. I was lying in bed one night when I heard the coughing start up again from below me. Deep, horrible coughing like someone was choking or dying. It happened almost every night around the same time. The guy who lived in our basement was a heavy weed smoker, and I'd gotten used to hearing him cough himself half to death down there. But this time, something was different. My roommate had just told me that the basement guy had moved out 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks. I sat up in bed, my heart starting to race. Doing the math in my head, the coughing had continued every single night. I'd heard it just last night. And the night before that. For the entire 2 weeks since he'd supposedly moved out. Which meant whoever or whatever was coughing down there in that creepy, moldy room under our garage. It wasn't the guy who used to live in the basement. It was something else. When we'd finally gone down to check out the basement after our new friend moved in, we discovered this bizarre little red door in the laundry room that led to a cement dungeon full of trash and old furniture and so much mold you could barely breathe. That's where the coughing had always come from. That's where I'd heard it every night for months, and for the last 2 weeks, with nobody living down there at all, the coughing had continued like clockwork. Someone or something was still in that room, coughing in the darkness, and we'd been hearing it the whole time, without knowing the living person was already gone. This all happened when I was living in Toronto a few years back. I was renting a place with 2 other roommates, and our living situation was a bit unusual. The 3 of us shared the main floor of an old house, and there was a separate basement apartment below us that was rented out to someone else. The house itself was pretty typical for Toronto, one of those older homes that had been converted into multiple units to accommodate more renters. The main floor where we lived had 3 bedrooms, a shared living room, kitchen, and bathroom. It was decent-sized and the rent was reasonable, which is why we'd taken it. Below us was the basement apartment. It was completely separate from our space with its own entrance around the side of the house. The person who lived down there basically had nothing to do with us. We were technically neighbors, but we rarely saw each other or interacted at all. The guy who lived in the basement when we first moved in was someone we didn't know much about. We'd see him occasionally coming or going, but we never really talked beyond maybe a quick hello or nod of acknowledgement. From what little we knew about him, he seemed to be a pretty big gamer. We could sometimes hear the sounds of video games coming up through the floor late at night. Explosions, music, the sounds of whatever game he was playing. It wasn't loud enough to be a real problem, just audible enough that we knew he was down there gaming. The other thing we knew about him was that he smoked a lot of weed. We could smell it sometimes, that distinctive odor drifting up from the basement. Again, not really our business. Plenty of people in Toronto smoke weed. It's not a big deal. But there was something else I noticed pretty quickly after we moved in. Almost every single night I could hear coughing coming from below my room. Not just a little cough or clearing the throat, I mean serious, prolonged coughing fits. The kind that sound like someone is about to cough up a lung. Deep, wet, horrible coughing that would go on for minutes at a time. At first I figured it was just from all the weed smoking. If you smoke enough of anything, you're going to cough. Made sense that a heavy smoker would have coughing fits. It usually happened late at night, around 11 or midnight. I'd be lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, and I'd hear it start up below me. Cough, 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 cough. Over and over. Sometimes it sounded so bad I wondered if the guy was okay, if he was literally choking or dying down there. But then it would stop, and everything would be quiet again. So I figured he was fine, just had a bad smoker's cough, and I tried to ignore it. This went on for months. Almost every night, like clockwork, I'd hear the coughing from below. I got used to it after a while. It became just part of the background noise of living in that house. My bedroom was at the front of the house, and below my room was supposedly the basement apartment. But as the weeks went by, I started to notice something odd about where the coughing sound was coming from. It didn't seem to be directly below my bedroom. The sound seemed to be coming from a slightly different area, more toward where our attached garage was. I started paying closer attention to it, lying in bed at night, listening carefully when the coughing started, trying to pinpoint the exact location, and I became more and more convinced that the coughing was coming from somewhere under the garage, not under the main basement apartment. This struck me as weird. Why would someone be hanging out under the garage? What was even under there? I mentioned it to one of my roommates one day. I told him I thought there might be some kind of room or space under the garage, because I kept hearing the basement guy coughing from that direction. My roommate was intrigued. We decided to investigate. We went out to the garage, which was attached to the house, but we barely used it. It was full of junk and storage stuff. We stood in the garage and started jumping up and down, stomping on the floor, and we could hear it. A hollow sound. An echo. There was definitely empty space below us. So there was some kind of room or area under the garage that was apparently connected to the basement apartment. Mystery solved. Sort of. The basement guy must hang out down there to smoke weed, which is why we could hear him coughing from that location. We didn't think much more about it. Just filed it away as a weird quirk of the house. Old houses have strange layouts sometimes, especially ones that have been divided into multiple apartments. Life went on as normal. The coughing continued almost every night. I'd hear it, register it briefly, and then ignore it and go to sleep. Then one day our basement neighbor told us he was moving out. I don't remember why exactly. Maybe he got a new job somewhere else, maybe he found a better place, I don't know. But he gave notice that he'd be leaving at the end of the month. This was actually good news for us, because we had a friend who was looking for a place to live in Toronto. The rent was expensive, and he was having trouble finding anything affordable. When we told him our basement apartment was opening up, he jumped at the chance. He arranged to move in basically as soon as the current guy moved out. I think there was maybe one day in between. The old tenant moved out on a Saturday, and our friend was moving his stuff in on Sunday. Our friend's name was Chris, and we'd known him for years. We were excited to have him living in the same house as us. It would be like having another roommate, even though he'd technically have his own separate apartment. Chris asked us to help him move some of his stuff in on that Sunday. Of course we said yes. We headed down to the basement to help him carry boxes and furniture. This would be the first time any of us had actually been inside the basement apartment. The previous tenant had kept to himself, and we'd never had any reason to go down there. I was particularly excited because I wanted to see this mysterious room under the garage. The place where we'd heard all that coughing for so many months. I was curious what it looked like down there. Chris let us in through the basement entrance, and we started bringing stuff inside. The apartment was bigger than I'd expected. It had a bedroom, a small living area, a kitchenette, and a laundry room. As we were moving stuff in, I noticed Chris was getting increasingly frustrated and annoyed. He kept making comments about how dirty and disgusting everything was, how the previous tenant had left the place in terrible condition. I looked around, and yeah, it wasn't great. There was some garbage that hadn't been taken out. The bathroom needed cleaning, stuff like that. But it didn't seem that bad to me. Nothing that couldn't be cleaned up in an afternoon. I mentioned this to Chris. I said, yeah, it's a bit messy, but the guy just moved out yesterday. He probably didn't have time to clean everything. You can just give it a good scrub and it'll be fine. Chris stopped what he was doing and looked at me with confusion. He said the previous tenant hadn't moved out yesterday. He'd moved out 2 weeks ago. I thought I'd misheard him. 2 weeks? That couldn't be right. The landlord had told us the guy was leaving at the end of the month, and Chris was moving in right after. But Chris insisted he'd been in communication with the landlord, and the previous tenant had actually moved out 2 weeks earlier. The apartment had been sitting empty this whole time. The landlord just hadn't gotten around to cleaning it yet, which is why it was in such poor condition. 2 weeks. The words echoed in my head. I stood there in the basement apartment, boxes in my hands, trying to process what Chris had just said. The basement had been empty for 2 weeks. Nobody had been living down here for 2 weeks. Then a cold chill ran down my spine as the realization hit me. I'd been hearing the coughing almost every night, including very recently. Including last night. I'd heard it just last night. That same horrible coughing fit coming from below my room. But if the apartment had been empty for 2 weeks, then who the hell had I been hearing? I must have looked strange because one of my other roommates asked if I was okay. I told them what I'd just realized, that we'd been hearing coughing from the basement for the last 2 weeks, even though nobody was living down here. Everyone stopped moving and just stared at me. Then my roommate said maybe I was mistaken about when I'd last heard it. Maybe it had been more than 2 weeks ago and I just wasn't remembering correctly. But I knew that wasn't true. I definitely heard it recently. Multiple times in the last 2 weeks, I was certain of it. I told Chris we needed to see the room under the garage. The weird space we discovered by jumping on the garage floor. That's where the coughing had always seemed to come from. And I needed to see it. Chris didn't understand why we were so interested in some storage room, especially when he was trying to move in and had a million things to do. But we insisted it was important. He led us through the apartment to the laundry room, which I realized was directly below my bedroom. This is where the washer and dryer were, along with some shelving and storage. Then Chris showed us something I hadn't expected. In the corner of the laundry room, partially hidden behind some boxes, was a small red door. It was only about 4 feet tall. The kind of door you'd have to duck down to go through. The red paint was old and peeling. The door looked like it hadn't been opened in years, based on how much junk was piled in front of it. Chris said this door led to the storage area under the garage. He'd looked in there briefly when he first saw the apartment, and it was just full of trash and old furniture that the landlord had dumped down there over the years. We moved the boxes aside, and Chris opened the red door. It creaked loudly on old hinges. Beyond it was darkness. Chris found a light switch and flipped it on. A single bare bulb illuminated what was beyond the door. It was exactly what he'd described. A cement room, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with a low ceiling. You couldn't stand up straight in there. You'd have to crouch or hunch over. The room was absolutely filled with trash and old broken furniture. Chairs with missing legs, rotting cardboard boxes, old paint cans, random debris. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust and grime. But the worst part was the mold. The walls were covered in it. Black mold, spreading across the cement in patches. The air that came from that room smelled damp and rotten and poisonous. This was the creepy room we'd been so curious about. This moldy dungeon under the garage. And apparently this is where the previous tenant had been coming to smoke weed every day. This disgusting, dangerous space full of mold and trash. It seemed insane to me. Why would anyone choose to spend time in there? The air quality alone must have been terrible. Between the mold and the smoke, it's no wonder we'd heard so much coughing. Anyone who spent time breathing that air would be coughing constantly. We stared into the room for a minute, taking it all in. Then, Chris said he wanted to close it up. The mold was probably toxic, and he didn't want it spreading into the rest of the apartment. He was going to talk to the landlord about getting it professionally cleaned and sealed off. We closed the red door and moved the boxes back in front of it. Chris went back to unpacking his stuff, and my roommates and I headed back upstairs to our apartment. But I couldn't stop thinking about what Chris had said. 2 weeks. The apartment had been empty for 2 weeks, and I'd been hearing coughing that whole time. I went to my room and sat on my bed, right above the laundry room. Right above that creepy red door and the moldy room beyond it. I tried to remember the last time I'd heard the coughing. It had definitely been recent. Within the last few days. Maybe even last night, though I couldn't be completely sure. But definitely within the 2-week period when the apartment was supposed to be empty. So if nobody was living down there, what had I been hearing? I considered the possibilities. Maybe I'd been hearing something else and mistaking it for coughing. Maybe it was pipes rattling, or the furnace making noise, or something mundane like that. But no, it had definitely been coughing. I'd heard it hundreds of times over the months. I knew what it sounded like. Deep, wet, human cough. Maybe someone had been squatting in the basement without anyone knowing. Maybe a homeless person had found a way in and was living in that moldy room under the garage. But that seemed unlikely. Chris said the landlord had been checking on the apartment periodically over the 2 weeks. Surely they would have noticed signs of someone living there. I didn't want to think about the other possibility. the supernatural explanation. But it kept creeping into my mind no matter how much I tried to dismiss it. What if the coughing wasn't coming from a living person? What if it was something else? The previous tenant had spent months smoking weed in that horrible moldy room, breathing in toxic air, coughing constantly. What if something of that had remained? Some kind of residual haunting or echo of all that suffering. I know how crazy that sounds. I'm not someone who typically believes in ghosts or paranormal things, but I couldn't explain what I'd been hearing any other way. That night I lay in bed listening carefully. Part of me hoped I wouldn't hear anything. That would mean I'd just been mistaken about the timing, that I hadn't actually heard coughing in the last 2 weeks. But another part of me, the part that wanted answers, hoped I would hear it. Just one more time so I could confirm I wasn't going crazy. I waited. 11 o'clock came and went. Midnight. Nothing, just silence from below. Maybe it was over. Maybe whatever had been making that sound had stopped now that we'd opened up the room and discovered it. I started to relax and drift off to sleep. And that's when I heard it. Cough, 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 cough. That same horrible deep coughing I'd heard so many times before, coming from directly below me, from the laundry room, from behind that red door. I shot up in bed, my heart racing. It was real. I was hearing it right now. And I knew for certain that Chris was the only person in the basement apartment, and he was in the bedroom on the other side of the apartment, not in the laundry room. The coughing continued for a few minutes, just like it always did. Then it stopped. Silence. I sat there in the dark, too scared to move. Too scared to go downstairs and investigate. What would I even find if I did? The next morning I told my roommates what I'd heard. They looked at me with a mix of concern and skepticism. One of them suggested maybe it was Chris I'd heard. Maybe he'd been in the laundry room doing something and had a coughing fit. I texted Chris to ask. He replied that he'd been in his bedroom all night watching TV and hadn't been anywhere near the laundry room. He definitely hadn't been coughing, so there it was. Unexplainable. Impossible. But real. Over the next few weeks, I continued to hear the coughing occasionally. Not every night like before, but often enough that I couldn't dismiss it. Chris never heard it. His bedroom was too far from the laundry room. But I heard it clearly from my room directly above. I never did figure out what it was. We eventually moved out of that house and I never experienced anything like it again. But I know what I heard. I heard someone or something coughing in that moldy room under the garage, long after the living person who used to go there had moved away. Whether it was a ghost, a residual haunting, or something else entirely, I'll never know. All I know is that it was real, and it was terrifying, and I'm glad I don't live in that house anymore. That creepy red door and the moldy dungeon beyond it can stay in my past, along with whatever was in there, coughing in the darkness. Look down. That's not a coyote. It's something else. And now it's watching you. My dad and his brother were leading a group of tourists on horseback through the California mountains when someone shouted and pointed into the valley below. It was a coyote, which wasn't unusual at all in that area. They stopped so the tourists could take pictures, but my uncle kept staring at it with this weird expression on his face, like something wasn't right. He said the coyote didn't look healthy. Its legs were way too long and thin, and it walked wrong. Most dogs and coyotes walk by moving opposite legs together. But this thing was walking like a camel, lifting both legs on the same side of its body at once. Its snout was at least 3 inches longer than normal, and it held its nose up high in the air like it was sniffing for something specific. My dad said it was probably just deformed. But their Native American friend who worked with them had gone completely silent. He was shaking and staring directly at the coyote. When my dad asked what was wrong, the friend pointed with a trembling finger and said to look at the tail. My dad looked and said he didn't see anything unusual. The friend's voice was barely a whisper when he replied that the coyote had no tail. No tail at all. He said he'd explain everything when they got back to camp, but he never looked at that thing again the whole ride back. And the coyote followed them. It stayed down in the valley, but it followed the entire group all the way back to base camp. The tourists thought it was cute. My dad's friend stayed silent the whole time. Then, when they were maybe 200 yards from camp, the coyote suddenly jumped out of the bushes right in front of them and smiled. Not a normal dog panting smile. A full human smile, showing off yellow, stained teeth. It stared directly at my dad's friend. That's when the friend pulled out a small piece of wood with an arrow burned into it and held it up toward the creature. The coyote looked away and let out a howl that my dad said he'll never forget. It was low and deep, almost like a man's voice, and it sounded like the thing had fluid in its lungs, like it was drowning while it screamed. Then it ran back into the bushes that night. The friend gave my dad and his uncle each a wooden piece with an arrow on it. He said it would protect them from the thing. He wouldn't tell them the whole story, just kept saying it killed them, and now it's going to try and kill me. And the less you know about it, the better. He drove away that night at 8 o'clock, and my dad never saw him again. Back in the 1970s, before I was even born, my dad had a job working as a trail guide in California. This was out in the central part of the state, in the mountains and grasslands where the landscape is beautiful and wild. His job was to lead groups of tourists on horseback across mountain trails. People would come from all over to experience riding through the California wilderness, seeing the natural scenery, maybe spotting some wildlife. It was my dad's job to guide them safely through the trails, tell them about the area, and make sure everyone had a good time. My dad really loved that job. He was young, probably in his early 20s, and he got to spend his days outdoors in the mountains doing something active and interesting. He met all kinds of people from different places who came through on the tours. He worked alongside his brother, my uncle, who had the same kind of job. The two of them made a good team. My uncle was always cracking jokes and keeping everyone entertained. My dad was more serious and responsible, making sure everything ran smoothly and everyone stayed safe. They worked for a company that ran these trail riding tours. The company had a base camp where the horses were kept and where tours would start and end. Tourists would show up, get matched with a horse based on their riding experience, and then my dad or my uncle or one of the other guides would take them out for a few hours through the trails. It was pretty routine work most of the time. Lead the group out, follow the established trails, point out interesting plants or rock formations, maybe spot some deer or rabbits, bring everyone safely back to camp, do it again the next day with a new group. But my dad always said he met some really interesting people during those years. Tourists from all over the world with their own stories. And also the other people who worked there with him. One of the people my dad met during this time was a Native American man who started out as a customer and eventually became an employee. My dad never told me his name, or if he did, I don't remember it now. But this guy became good friends with my dad and my uncle during the time they all worked together. The man had come from a reservation somewhere. He never said which reservation or where exactly it was located. He also never explained why he'd left the reservation to come work as a trail guide in Central California. My dad said the guy was pretty private about his background. He was friendly and good company, always laughing at my uncle's jokes and telling stories around the campfire. But when it came to personal questions about where he came from or why he left, he'd get quiet and change the subject. My dad respected that. He figured everyone has their reasons for the choices they make. If his friend didn't want to talk about his past, that was his business. My dad never pushed him on it, or tried to get information he clearly didn't want to share. So they all worked together for a while, leading tours through the mountains. My dad, my uncle, and their Native American friend became a regular team. They'd often take groups out together, with one of them leading at the front, one in the middle, and one at the back to make sure nobody got lost or fell behind. The tourists loved them. My dad was knowledgeable about the area. My uncle kept everyone laughing with his jokes and stories. Their friend had this calm, steady presence that made people feel safe, even when the trails got a bit challenging. It was a good setup, and they all enjoyed the work. Days spent outside in beautiful scenery, nights around the campfire swapping stories. For a young guy in his 20s, it was pretty much an ideal job. This particular day that my dad always tells me about started out completely normal. Just another ordinary day of work. They had a group of tourists, maybe 8 or 10 people, who'd signed up for a half-day trail ride through the mountains. My dad, my uncle, and their friend got the horses ready and helped the tourists mount up. They did the usual safety talk about how to control the horses, what to do if your horse gets spooked, staying together as a group, all that standard stuff. Then they headed out on the trail. It was a beautiful day, my dad always says. Sunny and warm, but not too hot. Perfect weather for riding. The kind of California day that makes you understand why people want to visit. They rode through grasslands and chaparral. That distinctive California landscape of golden grass and scattered bushes. The mountains rose up around them. Birds were singing. It was peaceful and scenic. Exactly what the tourists had paid for. My dad and my uncle were in good moods, joking back and forth like they always did. Their friend was riding along, laughing at their jokes, adding comments here and there. The tourists were taking pictures with their cameras. Those big, bulky cameras people used back in the 70s, before everything went digital. Everything was completely normal and routine. Just another pleasant day guiding tourists through the California wilderness. They'd been riding for maybe an hour or so when someone in the group shouted and pointed down into a valley on the left side of the trail. "Coyote." The tourist yelled, excited to spot some wildlife. Everyone stopped their horses and looked where the person was pointing. Sure enough, down in the little valley below the trail, there was a coyote. This wasn't unusual at all. Coyotes are extremely common in that part of California. You'd see them all the time, especially in the grasslands and chaparral areas. They're part of the normal wildlife you'd expect to encounter. My dad said they stopped to let the tourists get a good look. People always got excited about seeing wild animals, and a coyote was a perfect sighting. Close enough to see clearly, but far enough away to be safe. The tourists started taking pictures, pointing and talking excitedly to each other. My dad and his friends started chatting about something, not paying much attention to the coyote since it was such a common sight for them. But my uncle kept staring at it. My dad noticed his brother had this weird expression on his face. His features were all scrunched up like he was trying to see something more clearly or figure something out. My dad asked him what was wrong, what he was looking at so intently. My uncle said, "This coyote, it doesn't look healthy. Something's off about it." That got my dad's attention. He looked more carefully at the coyote down in the valley. My uncle was right. There was something strange about this animal. Its legs were unusually long and thin, way longer and thinner than a normal coyote's legs should be. It made the animal look stretched out, almost disproportionate. And it wasn't walking normally either. My dad knew how coyotes and dogs move. They walk by lifting a front leg and then lifting the opposite back leg. Right front with left back, then left front with right back. That's the normal gait. But this coyote was walking differently. It was lifting both legs on the same side of its body at the same time. Left front and left back together, then right front and right back together. Sort of like how a camel walks. The animal's snout was also wrong. It was at least 3 inches longer than a normal coyote's snout should be. And it held its nose up high in the air, pointed up toward the sky, like it was sniffing for something specific. My dad said it was probably just a deformed animal. Sometimes animals are born with genetic abnormalities that make them look unusual. It was weird looking, sure, but not impossible to explain. My uncle agreed. Yeah, probably just born with some kind of defect that made it look strange. Poor thing, probably had a hard time hunting and surviving with those weird proportions. But animals adapt. Their Native American friend didn't say anything. My dad glanced over at him and noticed he'd gone completely still and silent. The friend was staring directly at the coyote down in the valley, and he was shaking. Not shivering from cold, but trembling like he was terrified. His face had gone pale and his eyes were wide. He looked absolutely horrified by what he was seeing. My dad put his hand on his friend's shoulder and asked, "What's wrong? What is it?" The friend didn't look away from the coyote. With a shaking finger, he pointed down at the animal and said in a voice that was barely above a whisper, the tail. Look at the tail. My dad looked back at the coyote. He looked at where the tail should be. He didn't see anything unusual. What do you mean? My dad asked. It has no tail. And that was true. The coyote had no tail at all. Where there should have been a bushy tail, there was nothing. Just the animal's body ending at its hindquarters. My dad had seen plenty of animals with damaged or missing tails. Sometimes they got caught in traps or injured in fights. It wasn't that uncommon, but his friend was acting like this was significant. Like the missing tail meant something important and terrible. The friend said he would explain everything when they got back to base camp. He wouldn't say more than that. He just said to get everyone moving, to get back to camp. And he'd explain there. My dad could see his friend was genuinely frightened by whatever he was seeing or understanding about this coyote. So he agreed. He called out to the tourists that it was time to keep moving, and he led the group back down the trail toward base camp. As they rode, my dad noticed the coyote was following them. It didn't come up out of the valley onto the trail with them. It stayed down in the valley, moving parallel to their group. But it was definitely following them, keeping pace as they rode. The tourists thought this was delightful. They kept pointing and taking pictures, excited that this wild animal seemed to be accompanying them like a pet dog. "Look, he's following us," they said. "He must be friendly." My dad didn't think it was quite so charming. Animals don't usually follow groups of horses like that. It was odd behavior. But he didn't want to alarm the tourists, so he just kept the group moving steadily toward camp. His friend never looked at the coyote again. He kept his eyes straight ahead on the trail. He was silent the entire way back, which was very unlike him. Normally, he'd be chatting and joking with everyone. But now, he rode in complete silence. His face still pale, his hands gripping the reins tightly. They were getting close to base camp now. Maybe just a couple hundred yards away. My dad could see the buildings in the distance. That's when the coyote suddenly leaped out of the underbrush, jumping right onto the trail about 20 feet in front of them. The horses spooked. People screamed. Everyone jerked on their reins, trying to control their startled horses. The coyote stood there on the trail, completely still, staring directly at my dad's friend. And then it smiled. My dad always emphasizes this part when he tells the story. He says it wasn't a normal dog smile. Not that open-mouthed panting thing that dogs do that looks like a smile. This was different. The coyote's mouth pulled back in a deliberate smile. Lips peeled back to show off all its teeth, and the teeth were yellow and brown-stained, discolored in a way that looked unnatural and wrong. It was a human smile. A conscious, intentional smile. The kind of smile that shows awareness and intelligence and intent. The thing was smiling at my dad's friend like it recognized him. Like it knew him. And the smile wasn't friendly. My dad's friend stared back at the creature. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of wood. The wood had an arrow burned into it. Just a simple arrow design, like it had been drawn with a hot poker or burned with a wood-burning tool. The friend held up this piece of wood, showing it to the coyote, holding it between them like a shield or a ward. The coyote looked at the wooden piece with the arrow. Then it looked away, breaking eye contact with my dad's friend. And then it howled. My dad says he'll never forget that sound. He's heard plenty of coyotes howling over the years. Coyote howls are usually high-pitched, almost like yipping or yapping. A sound that carries through the desert night, but this howl was completely different. It was low-pitched, deep, almost like a man's voice trying to imitate a howl. My dad said it sounded baritone, like a deep male singing voice, and there was something wrong with it. Something wet and thick in the sound, like the creature had fluid in its lungs, like it was drowning and trying to scream at the same time. It was the most unnatural, disturbing sound my dad had ever heard an animal make. The howl echoed across the valley. Then the coyote turned and ran back into the bushes, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. Everyone sat there on their horses in stunned silence. The tourists looked shocked and frightened. My uncle, who always had a joke ready for any situation, turned to the group and said with forced cheerfulness, "Well, I hope you guys got your money's worth." A couple people laughed, nervously, but mostly everyone was just quiet and unsettled as they rode the last stretch back to camp. When they got back, my dad, my uncle, and their friend helped the tourists dismount and get their things. The tourists left pretty quickly, probably still rattled by the weird encounter. Once the tourists were gone, my dad and my uncle immediately turned to their friend and demanded to know what the hell that was all about. What was that thing? Why did it follow them? Why did the wooden arrow thing make it leave? But their friend wouldn't give them the full story. He was still pale and shaken. He said things in vague terms that didn't really explain anything. It killed them, and now it's going to try and kill me, he said. I thought I'd gotten away, but it found me. My dad asked who it killed, what it was, where it came from. The friend just shook his head. The less you know about it, the better, he said. I'm telling you this to protect you. If you don't know the details, you're safer. Trust me on this. Then he went to his truck and came back with 2 small pieces of wood. They each had an arrow burned into them, just like the one he'd shown to the coyote. He gave one to my dad and one to my uncle. He told them to keep these with them always, that the wooden arrows would protect them from the thing. He said he'd made the pieces himself. He'd prepared them before leaving the reservation, knowing he might need protection. He said he was glad he'd gotten to test them out, glad to know they actually worked to keep the creature away. My dad asked if he'd made extras. The friend said no. Just 3 total. 1 for himself, and now 1 for each of them. My dad and uncle tried to get more information. They asked where he was going, what he was going to do, if they could help somehow. The friend said he was leaving tonight. He couldn't stay in one place now that it had found him. He had to keep moving. He wouldn't answer any more questions. He said again that the less they knew, the safer they'd be. That getting involved would only put them in danger. At 8 o'clock that night, my dad's friend got in his truck and drove away. My dad and my uncle never saw him again. He didn't come back to work. He didn't call or write. He just disappeared from their lives completely. My dad tried to find him over the years, made some calls, asked around. But it was like the guy had vanished. Nobody knew where he'd gone. My dad still has that piece of wood with the arrow on it. He keeps it in a box with other important mementos from his life. He showed it to me once when I was a kid, after telling me this story around a campfire. He's told me this story many times over the years, especially during camping trips when we're sitting around a fire at night. My dad is a cheerful, upbeat kind of guy, and he usually tells the story in good spirits, like it's just an interesting, weird thing that happened to him when he was young. But sometimes, when he gets to the end of the story, his tone changes. He gets quieter and more serious. He says that on certain nights, cold nights when the wind is blowing through the trees and branches are rustling, he can hear it. That low, wet howl. The sound of the thing that wasn't a coyote. He says it's probably just his imagination, just the wind making sounds that his brain interprets as that horrible howl because the memory is so strong. He doesn't really believe the creature is still out there somewhere, still making that sound. But he keeps the wooden arrow anyway, just in case. I've asked my dad over the years what he thinks that thing really was. Was it actually some kind of supernatural creature, or just a deformed coyote and a scared friend who'd built up a superstition around it? My dad always says he doesn't know for sure. He's not someone who usually believes in supernatural things. He's practical and rational most of the time. But he saw what he saw. The way that animal moved. The way it smiled. The way it deliberately followed them and then confronted his friend specifically. The terror on his friend's face. A man who spent his whole life outdoors and wasn't easily frightened. And most of all, that howl. The sound it made. My dad swears no normal animal could make a sound like that. Whatever it was real. And it was dangerous enough that his friend ran from it and never came back. I've done some reading over the years about Native American folklore and legends. There are stories from various tribes about creatures that look like animals, but aren't. Shapeshifters and skinwalkers and other things that take animal form, but are something else underneath. Many of these stories involve coyotes specifically. The coyote is an important figure in a lot of Native American mythology. Sometimes a trickster, sometimes something darker. And there are stories about creatures that hunt specific people, that follow them from place to place, that smile with human intelligence and malevolence. I don't know if that's what my dad encountered. His friend never told him enough to confirm what kind of creature or entity it might have been. All we have is the encounter itself, and the few cryptic things his friend said. The friend clearly believed it had killed people he knew. People from the reservation, presumably, and he believed it was now hunting him specifically. He'd left the reservation to escape it, but it found him anyway, and once it found him, he had to run again. The wooden arrow symbol was protection somehow, enough to make the creature back off, at least temporarily, but not enough to stop it permanently or kill it. So the friend ran, and kept running, and my dad never heard from him again. I sometimes wonder if he's still out there somewhere, still running from that thing, or if it eventually caught up to him years ago, and he didn't survive the encounter. My dad wonders the same thing. He feels guilty sometimes, that he didn't do more to help his friend, but what could he have done? The friend wouldn't explain what was happening or accept any help. All my dad could do was take the wooden arrow, keep it safe, and remember, and listen on cold, windy nights for that low howl in the distance. The sound of something that looks like a coyote but isn't. Something that walks wrong and smiles wrong and makes sounds no animal should make. Something that hunts. My dad still goes camping sometimes. Still spends time in the California wilderness. He's older now. Retired from that trail guide job decades ago. But he never goes without that wooden arrow. It stays in his pack, wrapped carefully in cloth, just in case. Just in case, on some trail in some valley, he sees a coyote with legs too long and a nose held too high and no tail at all. Just in case it turns and smiles at him with yellow teeth and recognition in its eyes. Just in case he needs protection from the thing that his friend ran from all those years ago. The thing that might still be out there, somewhere in the wilderness. Still hunting, still howling that terrible drowning sound into the cold night air. I was alone. 4 a.m. And someone started scanning my bedroom through the window with a flashlight, heavy boots, jingling keys, and I had nothing but a small hunting knife. Would I survive the night? The hunting knife was small, maybe 5 inches long, but I gripped it like it was the only thing standing between me and death. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. Through the doorway, I could see the flashlight beam sweeping across the floor of my spare bedroom, methodical and slow, like someone searching for something. Or someone. I was 23 years old, living alone for the first time in my life. And I was absolutely certain I was about to die. My name is Rachel Stevens, and this is the story of the worst night of my life. And what came after. I moved into the basement apartment in early September. It was my first place completely on my own. No roommates, no parents, just me and 800 square feet of slightly damp concrete and carpet. The apartment was cheap, which was the only reason I could afford it on my receptionist's salary. Basement level meant the rent was almost half what the upper floor units cost. The windows were at ground level, which meant when you looked out, all you saw were legs in shoes walking by on the sidewalk. It was weird at first, but I got used to it. The apartment had 2 bedrooms. I used one as my actual bedroom, keeping the blinds closed for privacy. The other bedroom was empty, except for moving boxes I hadn't unpacked yet. That room had a problem, though. Water damage around the window from a leak in the building's foundation. The landlord said maintenance would fix it eventually, but in the meantime I should keep the blinds open to let it air out and prevent mold. So that room sat there, empty and exposed, with its blinds wide open to the sidewalk above. I had been living there for maybe 2 weeks when it happened. I was starting to feel comfortable, starting to enjoy the independence, starting to think I had made a good decision moving out on my own. I should have known better. It was a Tuesday night. I had gone to bed around 11, exhausted from work. I fell asleep quickly, which was unusual for me. I normally tossed and turned for at least an hour, but that night I was out within minutes. I don't know what woke me up. No sound, no movement. I just suddenly snapped awake, completely alert, every nerve in my body screaming that something was wrong. I looked at my phone. 4:07 in the morning. The room was dark. My window blinds were closed. Everything looked normal, but I could feel it. That primal instinct that tells you you're being watched, that you're in danger, that you need to run. I lay perfectly still, listening. My apartment was quiet. The building was quiet. No sounds from upstairs. No cars passing outside. Just silence. Then I saw it. A shadow on my closed blinds. A large shadow. Human-shaped. Standing right outside my bedroom window, which was at ground level. Someone was standing on the sidewalk looking at my window. My blood went cold. The shadow moved, shifted slightly, and I saw something else. A circle of light on my blinds, scanning, moving back and forth. Someone had a flashlight. Someone was trying to see into my bedroom. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. I just lay there, frozen, watching this shadow with its flashlight try to peer through my closed blinds. Then, the shadow moved. It walked away from my bedroom window. I heard footsteps, heavy boots on concrete, and the jingle of keys or maybe chains. The footsteps moved along the side of the building, toward the other bedroom, the one with the blinds wide open. Oh God, the spare bedroom. They could see right in. They could see there was nothing in there but boxes. They could see it was empty. I forced myself to move. Grabbed my phone. Grabbed the small hunting knife I kept in my nightstand. It had been my grandfather's. I had never used it for anything, except opening stubborn packages. But right now, it was the only weapon I had. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could. My apartment was small. From my bedroom, I could see down the short hallway into the spare bedroom. If I moved carefully, I could peek around the corner without being seen. I crept to the doorway of my room. The hallway was dark. The spare bedroom at the end was lit up by the streetlight outside, making it easy to see. And there, outside the window, scanning the floor with a flashlight, was a person. I couldn't see their face, just their silhouette. Big, tall, wide shoulders, heavy boots, and keys hanging from their belt, jingling softly every time they moved. They were searching the room methodically, sweeping the flashlight back and forth across the floor like they were looking for something. Looking for me. My hands tightened on the knife. This was it. This was how I died. Some psycho breaking into my apartment in the middle of the night. I was going to have to fight. I was going to have to use this knife. I was preparing to do just that, my whole body shaking with adrenaline, when my phone buzzed in my hand. A text message. At 4 a.m. I looked at the screen. It was from Tyler, my friend from high school who had joined the police force 2 years ago. We didn't talk often, but we were still friends. The message said, "What's going on at your apartment?" I stared at the text. What's going on at my apartment? How did he know something was going on? Was he nearby? Did someone call the police, or was this the universe's way of telling me I needed to call for help? I started typing a response with shaking hands, but before I could send it, the shadow outside the window moved. The person walked away. I heard those heavy boots and jingling keys moving back along the side of the building. Then silence. I stood in my hallway, knife in one hand, phone in the other, barely breathing. Were they gone? Had they given up? Or were they circling around to the front door? I texted Tyler back. Someone was looking in my windows. Big person with flashlight. Heavy boots. Keys. They just walked away. I hit send and waited. No response. The 3 dots that showed he was typing didn't appear. Nothing. I didn't know what to do. Call 911? But what would I say? Someone looked in my window and left? They didn't break in. They didn't threaten me. They just looked. I decided to go back to my bedroom, lock the door, barricade it with my dresser, wait until morning. If they tried to break in, I would have time to call for help. I was walking back to my room when I heard it. Bang, bang, bang. Someone pounding on my front door. Not knocking, pounding, like they were trying to break it down. I froze. My apartment door was at the top of 5 concrete steps that led down to my unit. There was no peephole, no chain lock, just a deadbolt. And whoever was out there was trying to break through. The pounding continued. Bang, bang, bang. I ran to the door and shouted, as loud as I could, "Who is it?" I wanted to scream loud enough to wake up everyone in the building. If this was a murderer, I wanted witnesses. I wanted someone to hear me. The pounding stopped. A voice came from the other side of the door. Male. Quiet. Almost meek. "It's the police." I didn't believe it. Not for a second. What kind of murderer doesn't pretend to be police to get someone to open the door? It was too obvious. Too convenient. I stood there, silent, knife in hand. The voice came again. "Ma'am, you're not in trouble. We just need to talk to you." Still didn't believe it. I pressed my eye to the crack between the door and the frame, trying to see something. Anything. I could just barely make out shapes. 2 people, standing at the top of the steps. But I couldn't see enough to know if they were really police or just people pretending to be. "I'm not opening the door," I called out. "If you're really police, prove it." A pause. Then, "Ma'am, we were the ones outside your windows. We're sorry we scared you. We're responding to a break-in report." That made me pause. They were the ones with the flashlight, looking in my windows. But why would police do that? What break-in? I asked through the door. Someone broke into an apartment in this building. We were checking windows to see which unit was damaged. We didn't mean to scare you, it still didn't make sense. But they knew about the flashlight. They knew they had scared me. And Tyler had texted me asking what was happening. Maybe he had seen the call come in and wondered if it was my apartment. I unlocked the deadbolt but kept the door mostly closed, just opening it a crack. Enough to see out, but small enough that I could slam it shut if needed. 2 police officers stood at the top of the stairs, both in uniform. One was backing away, giving me space. The other was standing at the door, looking apologetic. They were real cops. This wasn't a trick. These were actual police officers who had been the ones looking in my windows. I opened the door wider, still holding the knife behind my back. "We're really sorry," the closer officer said. "We got a report of a break-in. Someone saw a broken window and called it in. We were checking to find which apartment it was. We didn't realize anyone was awake." "You were looking in my bedroom window," I said, my voice shaking. "At 4 in the morning, with a flashlight." "I know. I'm sorry. We should have knocked first. We just wanted to check for broken glass before we started waking people up." The other officer spoke up from where he stood back near the stairs. "Is that a knife?" I looked down. I was still holding my grandfather's hunting knife. Small and useless against two grown men, but I had been ready to use it. "Yeah," I said. I thought someone was trying to break in. Both officers looked uncomfortable. "We're really sorry we scared you. That must have been terrifying." I felt the adrenaline finally start to drain from my body. My hands started shaking worse. My legs felt weak. I leaned against the doorframe to keep from falling. "So there was a break-in?" I asked. "Which apartment?" Turns out, it was 3 buildings over. Drunk guy broke his own window to get into his apartment after he lost his keys. We got the address wrong. Thought it was this building. We'll be more careful next time. They apologized again, made sure I was okay, and left. I closed the door, locked it, and stood there for a long time, just breathing. Tyler called me the next morning. "Hey, you okay?" "I saw the call come in for your building and wanted to make sure you were all right." I told him the whole story. The shadow at my window, the flashlight, the knife, the pounding on my door, how terrified I had been. He was quiet for a moment. "Rachel, I'm really sorry that happened. Those guys should have knocked first, should have announced themselves. You had every right to be scared. It's fine." They apologized. It was just a misunderstanding. Still, you're living alone in a basement apartment. That's already vulnerable. And then cops show up in the middle of the night looking in your windows without identifying themselves. That's not okay. He was right. It wasn't okay. But it was over. It was just a mistake. A scary mistake, but just a mistake. Except it wasn't over. 3 nights later, I woke up the same way. Suddenly, completely alert. Every instinct screaming danger. I looked at my phone. 4:13 in the morning. I looked at my window. A shadow. Someone standing outside with a flashlight. No. No, no, no. Not again. But this time I knew it wasn't the police. The police had already been here. They had already apologized. They had no reason to come back. So who was outside my window now? I grabbed my phone and the knife and moved to the hallway again. Peeked around the corner into the spare bedroom. Someone was there. Outside the window. Same position as before. Scanning the floor with a flashlight. Heavy boots. Jingling keys. But the police had left days ago. This wasn't them. I called 911. Whispered into the phone that someone was looking in my windows. That I was alone. That I was scared. The dispatcher kept me on the line while she sent officers. It took 8 minutes for them to arrive. 8 minutes of me hiding in my hallway, watching this shadow search my empty bedroom, waiting for them to try the door, to try to break in. But they didn't. They just stood there, looking, searching. When the police arrived, the shadow ran. I heard the boots running along the side of the building. The officers chased but didn't catch them. They searched the area, found nothing. No one. Just boot prints in the dirt outside my window and scratches on the window frame. Like someone had been trying to pry it open. "Do you have any enemies?" one officer asked. "Anyone who might want to scare you? Stalk you?" I couldn't think of anyone. I was new to the area. Didn't know many people. Kept to myself mostly. "Could be random," the other officer said. "Could be someone scoping out apartments to rob. They see your window is empty, might think you're out of town. They suggested I get better locks. Maybe move the boxes out of that room so it looked occupied. Keep all my blinds closed. I did all of that. Put boxes in my bedroom. Arranged furniture in the spare room so it looked lived in. Kept every blind and curtain closed tight. But it didn't matter. Every few nights, I would wake up. Always around 4 in the morning. Always with that same feeling of being watched. And always, when I checked, there would be someone outside with a flashlight. Searching. I called the police every time. They came. They searched. They never found anyone. After 2 weeks of this, I stopped calling. What was the point? The police couldn't catch this person, couldn't protect me. I was on my own. I started sleeping with lights on, with my knife on the nightstand, with my phone in my hand, ready to call for help. But the visits continued. 3 or 4 times a week, always at 4 in the morning. Always the same routine. Shadow, flashlight, heavy boots, jingling keys. I became exhausted, paranoid. I stopped sleeping well, even on the nights when no one came. I was always waiting for it, always expecting to wake up to that feeling of being watched. Tyler came to visit one weekend. I showed him the boot prints outside, the scratches on the window frame, the way I had rearranged my apartment to try to deter whoever was doing this. "You need to move," he said. "This isn't safe. Someone is targeting you specifically. You can't stay here. I can't afford to move. I'm in a lease. I'd lose my deposit. I'd have to pay to break the contract. Then at least let me stay here for a few nights. See if we can catch this person." Tyler stayed for 4 nights. Slept on my couch. Kept his police radio on. We waited for the shadow to come back. But they didn't. Not while Tyler was there. It was like they knew, like they were watching and waiting for me to be alone again. The night after Tyler left, they came back. 4:09 in the morning, shadow at the window, flashlight searching, heavy boots, jingling keys. I didn't call the police. I just lay in bed, knife in hand, waiting for them to leave. They didn't leave. They stood there for 20 minutes, searching, scanning, looking for something. Then they tried the window. I heard the scraping. Metal against metal. They were trying to pry open the window frame. I called 911, whispered into the phone. The dispatcher stayed on the line, said officers were coming. Just hold on. Just stay quiet. Don't let them know you're awake. The scraping continued. The window wasn't opening, but they kept trying. I could hear them grunting with effort, determined. Then I heard sirens. Faint, but getting closer. The police were coming. The scraping stopped. The shadow moved. I heard the boots running. By the time the police arrived, the person was gone again, but this time they left something behind. The officer found it in the dirt under my window. A crowbar, and on the handle, a partial fingerprint. "We'll run this," the officer said. "See if we get a match. Maybe we'll finally catch this guy." I wanted to feel hopeful. But I had heard that before. They would run the prints, check databases, probably find nothing. This person would keep coming back, keep trying to get in, and eventually they would succeed. I couldn't live like this anymore. I couldn't afford to move, but I couldn't stay either. So I made a decision. I would leave. Forget the lease, forget the deposit. I would pack my stuff and go back to my parents' house. Start over somewhere else. I gave my notice to the landlord that week, 30 days, and I would be gone. For those 30 days, the visits stopped. No shadow at my window, no flashlight, no scraping, nothing. It was like whoever had been watching me knew I was leaving. And they were satisfied with that. On moving day, Tyler and some other friends came to help. We loaded everything into a truck in a few hours. The apartment was empty again, just like when I had moved in. I did one final walkthrough, checked every room, made sure I hadn't forgotten anything. In the spare bedroom, standing at the window, I looked out at the sidewalk above. Legs and shoes walked by. Normal people going about their normal day, just like they had been doing for 2 months while I lived here in fear. I was about to turn away when I saw them. Boots. Heavy work boots. Standing right outside my window. Not walking, just standing. I looked up. A man was standing on the sidewalk, looking down through the window, looking right at me. He was wearing a maintenance uniform. His belt had keys hanging from it, jingling keys, and clipped to his belt was a flashlight. He smiled at me, a cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. Then he walked away. I ran outside, looked for him. He was gone, vanished into the crowd of people on the street. I went back inside and told Tyler, described the man. The uniform, the keys, the flashlight. That sounds like a building maintenance worker, Tyler said. Did your building have maintenance? Yeah, but I never saw them. My landlord said they would come fix the water damage in that room, but they never did. Tyler pulled out his phone and made a call. Talked to someone for a few minutes, hung up and looked at me with a serious expression. Your building's maintenance company fired someone 2 months ago, right around when you moved in. Guy was caught stealing from apartments, had keys to every unit in the building. They fired him but never got the keys back. 2 months ago, when I moved in, when the visit started. He had keys to my apartment? I asked. Probably, if he kept them when he was fired. I felt sick. Someone had keys to my apartment, had access to my unit, could have come in any time while I was asleep, while I was at work. Any time. Why didn't they change the locks? I asked. Tyler shook his head. They should have. But these cheap apartments, they don't always do what they should. We reported it. Police went to the man's address. He was gone. Apartment empty. No forwarding information. They issued a warrant. Put out a bulletin. But as far as I know, they never found him. I moved back in with my parents. Saved money for 6 months. Found a new apartment in a different city. 2nd floor. Good locks. Security cameras. No windows at ground level. I've been here for a year now. No incidents. No shadows. No flashlights. No visits at 4 in the morning. But I still wake up sometimes. Around 4 a.m. Heart pounding. Every instinct screaming danger. And I check my windows. Make sure the blinds are closed. Make sure the locks are secure. Because I know he's still out there somewhere. The man with the keys. The man with the heavy boots and the flashlight. The man who spent 2 months looking in my windows. Searching for something. Waiting for the right moment. And sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't moved out. If I had stayed in that basement apartment for another week. Another month. Would he have stopped just looking? Would he have finally used those keys? Would he have come inside while I slept? I try not to think about it. Try to focus on the fact that I'm safe now. That I got away. But the knife is still in my nightstand. My grandfather's hunting knife, small and probably useless against someone determined to hurt me. But it makes me feel better, safer, like I have some control. Tyler tells me I should get a gun, take self-defense classes, install more security. And maybe I will, eventually. But for now, I just try to sleep. Try not to wake up at 4 in the morning. Try not to check my windows obsessively. Try to believe that I'm safe, that he's not watching anymore, that he's moved on to some other victim in some other basement apartment. But deep down, I know better. People like that don't just move on. They don't forget. They just wait. They just watch from a distance. They just bide their time until the moment is right. And maybe one night I'll wake up at 4 in the morning and I'll see that shadow at my window, that flashlight searching my room, those heavy boots and jingling keys. And this time, there won't be any police to call. This time, I'll be on my own, with nothing but a small hunting knife and the hope that I'm strong enough to fight back. I pray that night never comes, but I prepare for it anyway, because once you've been hunted, you never really stop looking over your shoulder. You never really feel safe. You never really stop being prey. You just learn to live with the fear and hope it's enough to keep you alive. To keep you alive.